and I'm going to talk about the albums I've done at my top 20. I'm now going to do, these are going to be from number 21 and so forth. So, first album I'm going to talk about is a British folk star. Was about in the 60s, and was very influential to me when I was learning about singer-songwriting. And I've got loads of music books of him, but I'm going to show you my favourite album of his, which is called Mellow Yellow. Mellow Yellow, you may have heard the track because it's been used on adverts and so forth. And this album came out in 1967. So, who is Donovan? So Donovan was a 60s singer, sort of protest singer, but also a folk singer, but was influenced by Woody Guthrie, but used the Celtic folklore of ideas. So his songwriting, and why I love this album is because I love all the tracks in it. Superman Sunshine is a great album, but I don't like all of it as an album, whereas this album I think there's not a weak track on it. And actually then there's an actual live album called Donovan Live in Anaheim, and then that follows this album, and that's a really good live album. Probably one of the best live albums from the 60s, though not highly recommended like, say, the Grateful Dead or so forth. So, Donovan's songs like this were very much guitar, very simple guitar, singing, but one of the things that he's very good at is he's very autobiographical in his songwriting. Some of the ideas of it have a certain, like a troubadour idea of how that works. So, Mellow Yellow is probably the most famous song on it, but my favourite song of his is called Writer in the Sun, and it actually describes his time when he was, he had problems in the music industry, and he had problems with his record company. They were banning his records for some reason. There were some issues with rights and so forth, because he signed to Epic in America, but he was on, I think he was on some record company, some Pi Records in England, and there was a problem with it all. And Writer in the Sun is him talking about leaving the music industry, how he got despondent about it, and it's a really beautiful song. And the one thing about this 1967 album is actually that Donovan was the first guy who was in the 60s, and the counterculture was into marijuana, he was into LSD and all these different things, and living the life of a bohemian. And when he, once going on into this, he kind of fell out of love, and he kind of wanted to go the other way and be cleaner. So Donovan is very influential to British music because he was also very inspirational to the finger-picking style which Paul McCartney picked up for Blackbird and so forth. Also influenced the Beatles, knew Jimi Hendrix. So Donovan is probably one of the forgotten heroes of the British music scene, but is equally important because he also created a thing that he was the guy, probably was the precursor to Cat Stevens, and also was someone who has had a long career. Donovan still performs nowadays. He was one of the first people to bring, he actually was the person who brought the Beatles to the Maharishi, and also has very much done the yoga, the meditation. He's very spiritual in his concepts. So when I look at some of the songs, what I love of this is you get this idea of this kind of troubadour bohemian who lives in London. You've got a couple of things like here, he's talking, one of the things, Sand and Foam, is where he's in Mexico, and where he's travelled a bit, and he's got this idea of retiring. And then you've got things like Museum, which he's talking about the idea of him going to see the historic things. It's all like based in Kensington, which was all kind of becoming trendy because of Mary Quant, just sort of off the King's Road, all that sort of stuff. So Museum is all about South Kensington. Then he's got Hampstead, which is another area which was very affluent, but also was getting quite hip. And then he's got sunny South Kensington, so he's got this sort of, he uses this idyllic idea, because he wasn't from London, he was originally born in Glasgow, brought up in Milton Keynes, and then kind of lived on beaches and so forth. But everything about him has got this idea which I liked him when I was a child. Growing up, my mum was kind of into the 60s, but I got more into this stuff as a child. And then when I moved to London, I sort of revisited his work quite a lot, because I'm not from London originally. So I kind of like the idea of that I was from the outskirts, or I was from Suffolk, and I'd lived in other places. And then when I moved to London, I always felt that like that outsider. So Donovan's music had that feel for me, of this idea of that you know, you enjoy everything. You've got this like wide-eyed view of London, and then, but you've also kind of, I was that person. I would travel, you know, go to gigs, open mic nights. Sometimes I didn't play guitar, but I'd have my friend who played guitar, or I would play the piano and sing. And so I kind of, Donovan sort of inspired me a lot in my songwriting. And I do think he is probably one of the most underrated people in the music industry. And one of the things I do like, I mean, like I said, this is this album I've really looked after. I've had it a few years. I've got the CDs, but I used to have everything. I remember, because the 60s album, not many people had them. So I used to have them on cassette and record them and listen to them. So, you know, my Donovan albums are Mellow Yellow, and then also Soap, Sand and Sunshine, and then The Gift and the Flower, which is a box set. And I think his key period from 1965 to 1968, I think, was really influential to me as learning songs. I also have music books of his as well, which I learned a lot of the basics of songwriting. You know, like Superman Sunshine is based on the kind of different modes or ideal of C major chords. So he was also very influential in singing, pop styling, rhythms, things like that. And so to me, this is the key album for me. And I feel that it's an album that if you are into singer-songwriting, you know, most people like things like Ed Sheeran and so forth, but if you want to get into things which are more autobiographical and more interesting and more introspective, I recommend Donovan to you. Again, also, Donovan has been unfairly criticised as like the British Bob Dylan. I just don't think that's the same thing. Bob Dylan comes from a completely different thing of being influenced by Woody Guthrie and the blues scene, whereas Donovan is more influenced by the Celtic folklore. You see this in some of the tracks on Superman Sunshine with Three Kingfishers and King Arthur and the whole Camelot idea and Celtic folk ideals. So yeah, my recommendation, singer-songwriter, British, interesting, Mellow Yellow. I think you'll find it's a great album, and it's quite short, so you know you can listen